Hi, and thanks for tuning in to, let's call this episode 5.5 of the last Palabra podcast. Episode 5 went out on Monday, and this, rather than being an attempt at capturing and dumping the flow of information out of my brain, let's say this is a rugby special, because we are well into the first week into week 2 now, of the 2019 Rugby World Cup in Japan, and I want to welcome back, he was on last week. This week we're going to do a whole episode dedicating to just chatting rugby with Matt. So hey Matt, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Glad to be on again.
Yeah, thank you for coming back again.
Pleasure.
Did you enjoy the Rugby World Cup up till now?
It's had its ups and downs, hasn't it? But it's certainly been enjoyable. Seeing a lot of different things happening over the last few days, which has been very interesting. So yeah.
Well, we may as well get straight into it then. On that note, do you want to give us a kind of a rundown of kind of your most notable bits so far and what you've seen and what you're thinking?
Absolutely. So first, let's start with the biggest games of the weekend. So South Africa started with a war of attrition with New Zealand, which inevitably, I think we can agree, the world's best team managed to repel with relative ease, while scoring on the break against a very disconnected South African defence. South Africa really had little to offer in attack other than the physical battle, and New Zealand were able to pull away. And unfortunately, even standout performances from Peter Steph Toy, Damien De Allende, and also the mesmerising Cheslin Colby. South Africa really struggled to get a foothold in the game. Fiji offered an insight into their very dangerous best, with an incredible first half performance against what can be said to be a very flat-looking Australia. Half-time, however, gave Australia the chance to reassess and realise that without possession and front football, the Fijian style of play is relatively easily neutralised. Some controversy surrounding an illegal tackle going unpunished and causing one of Fiji's most dangerous players to leave the field and possibly cutting his World Cup short was a bit of a turning point. And with World Rugby's supposed stance on high and dangerous tackles getting more and more rigorous, they put themselves in a position where if they don't come out of this with a lengthy ban, they could end up looking very weak indeed. France also put on a very exciting first half, playing Argentina. The rugby they played, it sort of lent themselves to the France of old, and I'm sure that their greats would have been pretty proud of. Running wild in broken play and dominating set piece, which was a bit of a worry for Argentina, who had no real answer. And if not for a swift kick up the arse from Mario Ledesma at half-time, you'd expected France to run away with the game. That wasn't the case, and Argentina were able to short up their scrum and push to being within just a penalty of taking the victory. It wasn't to be, though, and France were able to hold on to their lead. England did a job against a much improved Tongan team, showing signs as to why they're amongst the favourites for this tournament. However, there were many errors in this performance, especially from the English pack, who gave away needless penalties, and maybe a key area for improvement before the USA on Thursday. Overall, though, England seemed to be in a very decent position moving through the group stages. With world number one ranking, the rugby community expects a lot from Ireland, but for two early tries, there was little excitement come from Ireland's performance. Scotland's stalling with very easy-to-read attacking structure and defensive errors just gave Ireland the platform to ease through their opening round, dominating most facets of play. Italy showed the result of playing on the highest level, cruising past a Namibian side that's sure to be a fan favourite as plucky underdog, with Stephen Jones returning to Wales duty, helping his side ease past Georgia, whose defence, although very powerful, lacked organisation, which led winger Josh Adams to run the same line twice with two clean breaks, leading to easy scores. Finally, a far from dream start from Japan, who conceded early to Russia, managing to grind back into the game with an unbelievable offload and a wonder finish just to grab the lead before half-time, before running away with the game with relative ease in the second half. And the key things to take away from the opening weekend is that defensive structure really isn't high on the agenda for Tier 2 nations. Tier 1 nations are only warming up as they move towards the knockout stages, and finally we just need to get used to some very questionable officiating.
Okay, cool, thank you. That sort of gives us a solid overview. One of the things, I mean, I've for the most part only watched highlights because it's been a MotoGP weekend and I was busy with all of that. But one of the things that most sort of astonished me, I guess, more than anything, astonished is probably the right word, is some of the cool, like, footage that they got. Like it seemed like the camera was almost like it felt like it was watching a video game at points because the camera was like almost down amongst them and like traveling through them. And that's new this year, right? That's not something.
It's definitely not something I've seen before um, from
No.
most other platforms. I think it's ITV trying to really generate sort of some interest into rugby, just sort of getting people involved who aren't necessarily out and out fans, but it's giving a very different perspective on rugby in general.
I mean, that would make sense. It's quite a good way of getting more people involved, is to kind of make it look cooler. Certainly, that's something we do with motorbike racing. We try and generate cool graphics and cool like onboard camera looks and stuff. Like for me, one of the things that I always sort of note is that any major event like this, whether it's the Olympic Games, Rugby World Cup, Football World Cup, is that you always get something like this, some kind of new technology that they're just trying out because it's a good opportunity to try it out. They don't have to bring it out in all of the matches. They can just set it up in a couple of the stadiums or a couple of the venues, and it's just a cool way of bringing it out and seeing how it works. Before rolling it out maybe to every game or to every match or to. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Honestly, I can't see us using that kind of recording technique used openly for a fair few years, because the only ones that I've seen are sort of renders that have taken a few days to paste together. But it's certainly interesting to see what they're coming up with in terms of future recording processes, and whether we see it in the next few years or not. It's definitely increasing interest in the game.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's cool. I like it a lot. I guess. I mean, I've not really researched it that much. I guess it's a combination of like motorized pulleys on like a 3D camera kind of thing. I guess. I don't know.
Again,
I should have researched this a bit.
It's not something that I've looked into, but I know all of the players were wearing GPS trackers on the backs of their shirts. So whether it's used that kind of thing, I know it's very difficult to use the pulley systems while gameplay is sort of running, just because there's a lot of unpredictability about what's going to happen. So whether a team is going to kick, and then what happens if it hits one of these wires or hits the camera, and this kind of thing.
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of like going to say, is that rugby in some respects, like compared to, let's say, football, is much more predictable in some respects because they have to move kind of in line, if you like. Like, do you know what I mean? There's not so much back and forth as there is with football, let's say. But at the same time, it's kind of, 1 minute they're handing off the ball and passing along the line, and then the next minute there's a kick and it's up in the air, and obviously you don't want the camera technology to interfere with the game.
And with modern day gameplay, a lot of teams are looking to play just to generate errors from the opposition. So we're getting more and more of these kicking battles where the ball is just travelling back and forth on the pitch, and players stood in the middle. So it's, again, from that perspective, it's very difficult to generate that kind of render on in-game play situations.
I'm going to spring a question on you now because it's just come to me. So if you're not prepared, that's fine. Well, we're talking about the technology and stuff, and the video-assisted referee and the VAR is coming to football in the kind of like past year or so. But that's something that's been involved in rugby for a long time.
It has, yeah.
Have you got like any particular thought on that? I mean, I've got an opinion on it.
Yeah, there are a few different.
My thought is that in anything like this, kind of more accuracy is better. In general, I think any science and progress and technology is, on the whole, a positive step forward. But it's had a lot of criticism in football. But in rugby, it's kind of accepted. It's a normal thing.
Yeah, well, with the professional outlook on the game, it's becoming more and more important to get decisions right. And in my personal opinion, the more decisions we can get absolutely spot on can only be beneficial to the game. I'm surprised there have been such backlash with football, which doesn't generally have the same sort of values as rugby, in that you treat the referee as always right, and you've got this massive respect. So it's almost maintaining an air of humanity about the decisions that are made, and that there are going to be errors. But when we've got technology that's there, why not use it? it takes very little time to come to a decision, and the way it's managed now is, especially in rugby, is pretty seamless in decisions being made in under a couple of minutes. And let's face it, they're big fellas. They're running around the pitch for 85 minutes. They deserve a bit of a break, so why not? It just makes more sense to get more decisions right.
So that probably segues us quite well into something else we wanted to talk about. There's been a bit of I don't know, controversial in this kind of opening week or so of the World Cup, and that is the refereeing, because I saw that was it Reece Hodge, sort of during the match he wasn't punished for a dangerous tackle. Was it dangerous? Was it high? I don't know.
Yeah, you needed to.
But he's since been cited, right?
So the lawing itself, it's been in flux for a number of years now in terms of the tackle height. What kind of tackle would justify a red card, what tackle would justify a yellow card, and just a penalty, etc. So they've tried to bring in a large amount of clarity to that towards the Rugby World Cup. So there are a few things that they look at, and that's the direct force that's applied. So if it's a very hard hit that's likely to be very dangerous, that airs more towards the red card. If it's shoulder contact to the head or neck, again, red card. But there can be certain mitigating factors. So say a player has dipped or is going down, maybe they've slipped, they're going down towards the ground. It's very difficult to then make a legal tackle below the shoulder line. With Reece Hodge, though, the interesting thing was there was no dip. It was clear a shoulder to the face, fundamentally. And it's like I mentioned in our little roundup, it was to arguably Fiji's most dangerous player who'd been tearing them to shreds. And if you watch the video back, he's ran over Reece Hodge, or he has been ran over 4 or 5 times. And it's just missed. And I'm not sure if that's a case of the technology not being there or the fact that people are just ignoring it, but it just brings into question whether the clarity is actually any better now.
Okay. So maybe they should have gone back and had another look at that moment, rather than it
Yes,
it being kind of brushed over at the time, and then
and it wasn't like there was an opportunity, because the player's gone down with a clear head injury caused from this high shot, and obviously had to leave the field and didn't return after failing the HIA testing. So it just seems crazy to me that it wasn't looked at. Anytime there is an injury to the head, it should be looked at. It's not like the guy in the box has got that much to do that he can't take a quick couple of seconds to just look over this one bit of video clip, and it has no impact in play. They can all get back. And
sorry, this guy in the box, is it his responsibility to look over it and inform the referee as the kind of match is in progress, or is it up to the referee to refer?
So again, it's been in flux, and it brings it back to, if we've got the technology, why not use it? So it's a clear penalty. The it's not fourth official. The VAR, video assistant referee, whatever they're going to call him. I think he can interrupt play if it's foul play. So he can alert the referee to dangerous tackles or anything of a more foul play nature. Whereas if it's just a knock-on or forward pass, something along those lines, they generally keep themselves.
Okay. But as the match stopped in that moment, he could have just said, "Hey, that was a dangerous tackle." Obviously, he didn't see it.
I'm not sure how, because it was replayed 4 or 5 times, and with the commentators then also looking at it and then ignoring it, it just seemed crazy.
So he's got a 3-game ban, right?
Something like that. I can't remember exactly. Not really.
And is it kind of common for them to go and review and cite things and penalise things after the kind of match is finished, if you like? I nearly said after the checkered flag. That's my...
Fairly common. If something's missed, you have a citing process where you are treated as if you've been red carded at the time, and then you can have, like you say, Reece Hodge has got himself a little ban now, which works well, I think, because otherwise you'll get various issues just getting away scot-free.
Okay, and so let's, the refereeing standards kind of altogether in this, overall in this opening week have been criticised quite a bit. With even World Rugby coming out and saying that it's just not been up to scratch.
They've teased us with these kind of throwaway
statements saying that it's not been good enough. But until they actually do anything to change it, I can't see it having much impact. But I've always been very vocal in my disdain for French referees. I think their handling of gameplay is terrible. They miss a large amount of decisions, and overall they're pretty quiet during the game. So I'm not sure if that's down to any kind of language barrier or anything like this, but there's a clear disparity between these French referees and, say, Nigel Owens, who's always talking and is in quite high praise by players who are refereed by him, because he is constantly giving them updates as to what they're doing, and it leads for a much more flowing game of rugby where if someone's doing something that's not actually having that much of an impact in the game, he'll tell them and then it'll sort itself out, rather than a French referee standing there watching it, stopping the game for a penalty when it just didn't really need to get to that position.
So as a player, would you kind of expect the referees to kind of go along chatting with you, almost kind of like coaching you in terms of the laws of the game?
On the international stage, you would expect players to understand the laws of the game. It's just these small areas where if someone's offside, he'll let them know that they're offside, and they can then take a step back. Again, it's not had any impact on the game. There's no reason to give a penalty away and stop the game altogether and then wait for the game to continue. As you move down the rankings and, say, move towards grassroots rugby, you tend to move away from that with more authoritarian former PE teacher style. It's as a player you'd expect them to be in constant conversation.
So the referees take a kind of almost like a preemptive approach. Like, I'm telling you if you're going to commit a foul so you can avoid committing it so we can keep playing. Is that
exactly? And it just leads to a much better flow of the game.
I mean, that's better for the players and the spectators, no?
Much better. I mean, if the game is constantly start with no flow, it leads to great difficulty in setting up attacking structures or defending with any intensity, just because you are literally just stop-go.
So World Rugby have said the match officials team recognised that performances were not consistently of the standards set by World Rugby and themselves. And they've said that they're confident of the highest standards of officiating moving forward. So what are they likely to do to make sure that the officials fall into line?
Honestly, I can't see them doing much. Each official after each game will get they'll sit down with a member of some referee and coaching staff, and they'll go through each decision they've made. But there's often a society of referees that will back a referee, and it's almost an us versus them kind of situation where if a referee's made a bad decision, they'll look for justification as to why they've made a bad decision, rather than looking at it and saying, "Yep, no, fair enough, it was a terrible call, and we'll look to change it in the future." But there's been such clear evidence, especially, say, the South Africa-New Zealand game. I mean, I put a video on Twitter that just highlights all of the decisions that were made, and it just doesn't make for good watching, really, especially for a South African fan. And I know they've been fairly vocal in the media about it.
Yeah. I mean, so we're at a crucial stage, really. Okay, it's only the opening match, but for a team like South Africa, it was a crucial moment in their World Cup campaign, if you like. You know, this could have bad decisions here could make a difference between whether teams get beyond the group stages or beyond the knockout stages.
Yes.
No?
I mean, for South Africa, I don't think it's going to be an issue for them getting through. I don't see them having much more of a challenge in that group. But then your seeding has changed, so the teams you play later on in the knockout stages changes. And for a team that bases so much of their attack around a very strong set piece to allow them to gain front football, the decisions that were made around the scrum, which, to be honest, were outrageously bad, just didn't allow them to get that foothold. So they played very open rugby, which isn't like them, and it just didn't feed into how they wanted to play.
Because they were getting penalised for what? For the scrum? Or?
It was more a case of a lack of penalisation. So it's clear to see in videos that Joe Moody, who's the New Zealand prop, was constantly dropping his elbow to the ground, which completely stops any kind of force being generated through the scrum. So if, say, South Africa were in a defensive position where they generally would dominate a set piece like that, they weren't able to then get onto the front foot to then defend for a turnover. They were always sort of chasing their feet a little bit.
Okay. So, I mean, we hope that these standards will pick up now then in the coming week or so.
Well, I hope so. The easiest way is to make sure
Hopefully next time.
Big games.
Yeah. I guess that's it. They need to rotate their referees a bit better.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the head of the referees is a French bloke, so we'll see what happens.
Matt and his disdain for French referees.
Exactly.
You mentioned to me before we kind of started recording about a new rule as well that I think relates to the kind of tackle that you mentioned before with Reece Hodge. So is this a fixed rule that they're changing, or is it something they're kind of trialing?
In terms of the tackle height and what is deemed to be a dangerous tackle.
Yeah.
So, like I said before, it's very much something that's been in flux. So across various different levels, they've had different trials running where the tackle height is reduced from shoulder down to sort of nipple line, with anything over the shoulder. So something called a seatbelt tackle, which is often a cover tackle where a hand or arm goes over the shoulder of an opposition player. Never really does that much damage. Definitely not a dangerous tackle, but is starting to get penalised. Just an attempt to lower the tackle height. The other things they've been running is mitigating circumstance. So there are certain aspects of a tackle that, if deemed to be dangerous, would warrant a red card. So there's shoulder contact with the head or neck, a lack of arms used in a tackle, these kind of things that would warrant a red card. However, with the mitigating factors or mitigating circumstance, the referees are allowed to have a certain amount of say in how they deem the tackle to have happened. So say a player's slipped or a player is going down towards the ground and has dipped just prior to the tackle, which we saw a couple of times in the Samoa game, where two players were yellow carded, which again, French referee, a couple of terrible decisions where they should have been red, because it's clear shoulder contact at the head with very minimal change of height from the attacking player. But it's these mitigating circumstances that allow for the referees to have more a say of what happens during that game. Okay.
So it's kind of like, on the one hand, it's making more kind of concrete rules, if you like, but on the other hand, it's giving more sort of subjective power to the referees.
Yeah, it's an attempt to make things very clear cut, but I'm not sure on the success. Just because the mitigating factor, it's a situation where it needs to be black and white, but it's not really a direction that I don't think rugby's able to head in, just simply because the tackle height itself is constantly changing. As long as people are being penalised, happy days, but I'm not sold on mitigating factors, simply because there's still amount of decision to be made as to what makes the dip sufficient dip to become a mitigating factor.
And with any sort of rule like that, where there is some loophole that could be played, it will likely to be played, I guess.
Yes.
We're talking about competitive sport.
It's very much a way to ease the sort of the stress on referees, so they're able to make more decisions more clearly, which as an idea should be supported, but I'm just not sold on the mitigating factors.
Fair enough. Any surprises in the opening week?
I
think France-Argentina was a bit closer than you sort of maybe anticipated, no?
The thing was, I had no anticipation for the game. It was very much, you never know which team's going to turn up. So a team like France, who's sort of historically has played a very open game, in recent years their coaching style has changed that to try and fit in more with the norms of international rugby, where they're playing more structures. And it's kind of stifled their ability to play. But it seems that moving into this World Cup, they've got this very open style back, which is brilliant to see for the common fan. Maybe a little bit worrying for whoever France appear to be facing later on in the tournament. But yeah, it was also good to see Argentina get some good form in the second half. Again, it's a team that's very much struggled outside of World Cups over the last few years.
And England, it looks like quite a convincing win, 35-3. word is generally, from what I can gather, that the performance wasn't up to much, despite the score. The score doesn't reflect the kind of the
No,
performance.
but early on stages in a World Cup, I think any team is just looking to get the first victory on the card. I'm not sure anyone will be too worried and will be pretty happy just to get the W. Same with Ireland. I mentioned before that Ireland weren't overly impressive, but to get a victory over Scotland, who again, it's a team that you're not sure who's going to turn up. So just to get the win out there, it just lends itself to a more interesting stage, latter stage of the groups.
Okay. England, of course, play USA tomorrow. What can we expect from USA?
So with the USA, the game itself has been growing pretty rapidly in the US with a professional league, and that's sort of it's had the draw of a few big names going over. So for England fans, like Ben Foden now playing in New York, Mathieu Bastareaud has just signed a contract to go again over to New York. So it's really getting a good pull in towards the domestic league. I'm not sure how that itself is going to translate into the international stage. In terms of sevens, they've grown massively and have put in some really incredible performances. But the sevens itself, it's very relatively easy to make an impact. So basically the inclusion of a couple of Olympic level sprinters and investment in the world's best skills coaches is probably going to do a job at that on that stage. But 15s is just a different animal altogether. So attacking and defensive structures are much more complex. And I think it will take a little bit longer to cement any kind of development into a top international setup.
But I mean, if there's any country in the world that can bring a team to the top of the game very quickly on the world stage, it's the United States, right?
Absolutely. They're very much either, if they're not involved, they don't care. But if they put a little bit of investment into it, it's huge. So we'll see how that goes. I think possibly not with this World Cup, but moving towards the next 4 years, I reckon they'll really start to put in a few performances that could start shocking people.
And it looks like Eddie Jones is going to bring in almost a completely different England lineup, including a couple of debuts as well on the international stage, no?
Yeah, so we've got the likes of McConaughey, who's, again, he's come from a sevens background, should have made his debuts throughout the warm-up games, but through various injuries, he's had to pull out. And then you've also got other young players. So Joe Cokanasiga is making a World Cup debut. You got Lewis Ludlam, who's, again, we've talked about him before. He's a huge impact come off the bench. So we'll see how he does starting the game. And then apart from that, we're pretty cemented in positions. So maybe not necessarily a young addition, but Willie Hines at 9, who's shown great control for Gloucester. And as long as the England pack can stay on the front foot, the likes of Hines and Ford should be able to really put in a performance.
Yeah, I mean, Jones has sort of said he wants a different approach against the United States, saying that they want to start fast. Whereas in Tonga, they said that they kind of let them play for the first 20 minutes or so with the intention of kind of building it up.
Yeah, which is what you'd expect from Eddie. There aren't too many big names throughout the USA team. I think looking through, they've got players like AJ McGinty, Martin Asefo, Blaine Scully, but those are the only ones you'll have heard of before. So it makes sense to want to start that game very quickly and really put a strong performance out from the first minute. And Tonga, you just never know how they're going to turn up. So the week before they lost 92-5 or whatever it was to New Zealand. So just to get the win, I'm sure they're fairly happy with that, no matter what he's saying in the press.
Sure. So in terms of sort of spectator, I mean, it's at midday, something like that, tomorrow or today, depending on when you listen to it, or where in the world you're listening.
Yeah, late morning, I think.
Yeah, right. In terms of a spectator match, are we expecting kind of like a lot of action at the start and then maybe England to kind of sit back and allow the US to attack a little bit, or?
I don't think many teams will look to sit back during these opening engagements. I mean, majority of players are looking to perform and looking to send a message to say that they want to get selected in the later stages. So if any player is seen to be be letting off. I'm sure it's not going to bode well for them in those stages moving forward. But I highly expect England to run away with this, and if not, I'm sure they'll be pretty disappointed.
Okay, how about any other kind of matches coming up that you've earmarked? I'm having a look at the fixtures now. A big one on Sunday, Australia-Wales, I guess.
Yeah, that'll be pretty interesting to see. There aren't too many big fixtures in this round. I mean, South Africa, Namibia. I think the rugby skeptics will probably brand this South Africa A versus South Africa B. But there's a huge amount of pride in the Namibians they have in their shirt, and historically, it's been primarily an amateur or semi-professional outfit. So it's really interesting to see how they go. And I'm sure, I said before, they'll be a fan favourite as underdogs. They'll have seen what Japan did to South Africa 4 years ago, and I'm sure they'll be chomping at the bit to sort of make that kind of impression.
And what about Japan Island on Saturday? You mean the host nation, taking on the number one in the world, early doors as well, in a fairly... I mean, that group seems to have the kind of the headlines already written. What can we expect for this one?
I expect another somewhat dull and efficient Ireland performance. Their game plan in general hasn't been too wide and expansive. So 2 massive pushover tries against Scotland, and not really showing too much invention in the backline. I mean, granted, their opening game, the weather took a pretty hefty turn for the worse. So playing in a tsunami almost. So we'll see what they can do on a dry track. But again, I don't see them doing anything more than an efficient job. But I know the majority of the rugby community will be keeping their fingers crossed that Japan can sort of put another performance out and really impress the public, because I think they need it moving forward.
What about... I'm just looking at the fixtures. What about Canada? What do you make of Canada? I mean, they've got 2 big matches coming up. They've got Italy, who they lost to against in 2015, right? In the World Cup. And then not long after that, they've got... So that's tomorrow, in fact. Italy-Canada today, depending where you are. And then the next match after that is New Zealand. So they're up against it.
Yes. It's very tough.
I mean, they're not... With New Zealand and South Africa, they're not going to get out of that group, realistically.
No. I think what all Canada are looking to do is gain that 3rd position where they're guaranteed placing them at the World Cup in 4 years' time. I think they'll probably struggle against Italy. In the warm-up games and throughout the Six Nations, Italy themselves have been playing on the top level. So they're really sort of... In their mindset, they've been playing on that level for many years. Although not massively successfully, but they've been competing on various occasions. So Canada themselves, I'm not sure they're just going to have it in the tank to really push forward. I mean, that being said, I know today Uruguay beat Fiji, which was a massive shock after Fiji's big performance against Australia. So maybe it is the year for the relative unknown. We'll only have to wait and see.
I mean, Uruguay, of course, have got Georgia, so that could be... Okay, Georgia didn't get the result against Wales by a long shot, but they've got a massive scrum, absolutely huge scrum.
Yes. Scary scrum, yeah.
Yeah, right? I mean, I remember you telling me about it, and then having seen it, I was like, okay, that's what Matt was talking about.
No, very scary pack, and with Gogodza coming out of retirement on fundamentally the request of the Prime Minister, I'm sure they're expecting big things from him.
Any other kind of standout matches that we can look forward to in the next sort of 7 days?
Nothing really throws itself out at me. I mean, Australia-Uruguay will be quite a good game after Uruguay's first victory over Fiji. And then obviously England-Argentina itself will be pretty heavy. Apart from that, I think we're in for a few shocks and a few surprises, but we'll have to wait and see.
And last thing then, before we kind of wrap it up, what do you think of the World Cup so far in terms of how they, in terms of the spectacle, if you like, the show? Japan as a host nation, what's your kind of thoughts so far as in terms of a cup?
It seems to be pretty impressive. Obviously, with the growth of rugby in Japan over the last few years and a pretty decent league structure, which has sort of
allowed the likes of Quade Cooper and Will Genia to sign contracts with teams that aren't even in the top tier of Japanese rugby. It's really lending itself to be the next rugby nation. And that's showing itself in the games and the prep for those games. They're really putting on a show, which, to be fair, at this kind of event, you wouldn't expect any less. But it certainly seems like the kind of event that you would hate to miss out on and have to watch it on TV at home.
Like England did 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Anything else before we wrap it up for this week, if you like?
I don't think so.
Cool. Shall we sort of have another go next week?
I'll certainly be around. I'll certainly have watched a fair few games of rugby over the next few days. So yeah, let's sit down and have a chat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm visiting. I'm in England this weekend, so hopefully I'll get to see some actual rugby rather than just watching highlights in between motorbike races.
Well, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Hey Matt, thank you very much once more for coming on and sharing your rugby knowledge.
Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. I'll let you go, and yeah, we'll speak again next week.
Perfect. Cheers,
Cheers, mate. So thanks for listening to episode 5.5 of the Last Palabra podcast. We'll be back on Monday with episode 6. Follow Matt. You can find Matt. He's on. You can go to his website, in fact, primalathletic.com, where he'll be sharing all his insights of the 2019 Rugby World Cup as we go on. He's also on Twitter and Instagram. I'll be tagging him in all the posts, of course, if you follow me on Twitter and Instagram, where I'm at the Last Palabra. Do the subscribing and sharing thing, and thanks again for tuning in. Be back on Monday for episode 6.